This is The Ghost Soldiers from The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. This chapter is one of the longest chapters, so it's going to be cut into two sections. So this will stop before the end of the chapter. I was shot twice. The first time, out by Tribe Inn. It knocked me against the pagoda wall, and I bounced and spun around and ended up on Rat Kiley's lap. So when we notice that we're back to first-person narration here. And thinking about kind of going back from removed when we're talking about other people, the young soldier or Kurt Lemon, and now we're back to narrator Tim O'Brien and kind of more experiential. A lucky thing, because Rat was the medic. He tied on a compress and told me to ease back. Then he ran off toward the fighting. For a long time I lay there all alone, listening to the battle, thinking, I've been shot. All those Gene Autry movies I'd seen as a kid. So here, this is more kind of cognitive than emotional, like just kind of an awareness issue, right? It's not like, oh my God, I've been shot, but kind of more interest or kind of curiosity might be the word that I'm looking for. In fact, I almost smiled, except I started to think I might die. It was the fear mostly, but I felt wobbly, and then I had a sinking sensation, ears all plugged up, as if I'd gone deep underwater. So then we've got a shift there. Thank God for Rat Kiley. Every so often, maybe 4 times altogether, he trotted back to check me out, which took courage. So here we're back to the idea of courage, coming back to do something that this is hard, and appreciated. It was a wild fight, guys running and laying down fire and regrouping and running again. Lots of noise, but Rat Kiley took the risks. Easy does it, he told me. Just a side wound, no problem unless you're pregnant. So there's a little bit of humor there, right? Because Tim O'Brien is unlikely to be pregnant. He ripped off the compress, applied a fresh one, and told me to clamp it in place with my fingers. Press hard, he said. Don't worry about the baby. Ha 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 ha, right? Then he took off. It was almost dark when the fighting ended and the chopper came to take me and 2 dead guys away. Happy trails, Rat said. He helped me into the helicopter and stood there for a moment. Then he did an odd thing. He leaned in and put his head against my shoulder and almost hugged me. Coming from Rat Kiley, that was something new. So here we've got the idea of kind of connection and kind of out of character connection. That kind of goodbye and kind of a statement almost of love and of caring. On the ride into Chulai, I kept waiting for the pain to hit, but in fact I didn't feel much. A throb, that's all. Even in the hospital it wasn't bad. When I got back to Alpha Company 26 days later, in mid-December, Rat Kiley had been wounded and shipped off to Japan, and a new medic named Bobby Jorgensen had replaced him. Jorgensen was no Rat Kiley. So we've got that short sentence that kind of captures that. So we notice that there's been change while he was out. That this 26 days in terms of war can mean a lot of things. It can mean death. It can mean injuries. It can mean, movement of places, etc. He was green and incompetent and scared. So we've got 3 concrete adjectives there to tell us about what we need to know about Jorgensen. So when I got shot the second time in the butt along the Song Trebong, it took the son of a bitch almost 10 minutes to work up the nerve to crawl over to me. So here we've got a contrast with the courage that Rat had to keep coming back to him versus this new guy can't even come over for the initial problem. So there's a really stark contrast between the two here. Here you'll notice that he's been shot in the butt, and this always reminds me of Forrest Gump. So if you get a chance, it's a good one to kind of go back to here during this chapter. If you have time, don't do it during your English time. But if you have time, it's a good time to maybe think about the ideas that Forrest Gump brings to the Vietnam War and the time surrounding it and how that might be similar or different to this. By then, I was almost gone with the pain. So again, a contrast. He didn't even feel it when Rat was treating him, but here he's feeling the pain. Later, I found out that I'd almost died of shock. Bobby Jorgensen didn't know about shock, or if he did, the fear made him forget. To make it worse, he bungled the patch job. And a couple of weeks later, my ass started to rot away. It's a kind of a crass way to say it, but very kind of concrete and graphic almost. You could actually peel off fillets of meat with your fingernail. That's really kind of gross. It was borderline gangrene. I spent a month flat on my stomach. I couldn't walk or sit. I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Bobby Jorgensen's scared white face, those buggy eyes, and the way his lips twitched, and that silly excuse he had for a mustache. After the rot cleared up, once I could think straight, I devoted a lot of time figuring ways to get back at him. So here we've got a theme here going on, and you can tell in even the language that came before, this idea of blame and maybe even revenge, that he wants to get back at him for not doing what Kylie could do in the same circumstance. Getting shot should be an experience from which you can draw some small pride, which is interesting. Like that kind of makes me think of a second grader who wants to break his or her arm in order to get the attention. That there's something positive about it and something that you can get out of it. I don't mean the macho stuff. All I mean is that you should be able to talk about it. The stiff thump of the bullet, like a fist, the way it knocks the air out of you and makes you cough. How the sound of the gunshot arrives about 10 years later, and the dizzy feeling, the smell of yourself, the things you think about and say and do right afterward. The way your eyes focus on a tiny white pebble or a blade of grass, and how you start thinking, oh man, that's the last thing I'll ever see, that pebble, that blade of grass, which makes you want to cry. So here's a really concrete discussion of kind of maybe how it feels to talk about it, this idea of speaking of these things. And maybe pride might be akin to courage, or it's something similar, I suppose. And then he says, pride isn't the right word. I don't know the right word. All I know is you shouldn't feel embarrassed. Humiliation shouldn't be a part of it. Diaper rash, the nurses called it. An in-joke, I suppose. But it made me hate Bobby Jorgensen the way some guys hated the VC. Gut hate, the kind of hate that stays with you even in your dreams. So we go back to that idea of blaming him. And now it's not just for the potential physical, but also the fact that he's been humiliated and he doesn't even have a good injury. It's an injury that's embarrassing. I guess the higher-ups decided I'd been shot enough. At the end of December, when I was released from the 91st Evac Hospital, they transferred me over to headquarters company, S4, the battalion supply section. Compared with the boonies, it was cushy duty. We had regular hours. There was an EM club, that's enlisted man's club, with beer and movies, sometimes even live floor shows, the whole blurry motion of the rear. For the first time in months, I felt reasonably safe. The battalion fire base was built into a hill just off Highway 1, surrounded on all sides by flat paddy land, and between the paddies there were reinforced bunkers and observation towers and trip flares and rolls of razor-tipped barbed wire. So here we get a little bit of a contrast with the front, right? We still have some of that the danger stuff, but a lot of it is more comfortable than the things that we've seen before. You could still die, of course. Once a month we'd get hit with mortar fire, but you could also die in the bleachers at Met Stadium in Minneapolis. Bases loaded, Harmon Killebrew coming from the plate. So here, a really concrete, specific comparison that this is about the same amount of danger as going to a baseball game. I didn't complain. In an odd way, though, there were times when I missed the adventure, even the danger of the real war out in the boonies. So real war versus this fake war at the back, the not being shot at and not being part of that particular thing. It's a hard thing to explain to somebody who hasn't felt it, but the presence of death and danger has a way of bringing you fully awake. This kind of reminds me of Kiowa when he was considering not being dead, and a couple other places, this aliveness, and even kind of the beauty that you see in Napalm, this aliveness. It makes things vivid. When you're afraid, really afraid, you see things you never saw before. You pay attention to the world. You make close friends, and so now he's separated from those close friends, right? You become part of a tribe, and together you share the same blood. And so these are all connective things that connect people, right? You give it together and you take it together. On the other hand, I'd already been hit with 2 bullets. I was superstitious. I believed in odds with the same passion that my friend Kiowa had once believed in Jesus Christ, or the way Mitchell Sanders believed in the power of morals. I figured my war was over. If it hadn't been for the constant ache in my butt, I'm sure things would have worked out fine. But it hurt. So here, it would have worked out fine, so we've got some foreshadowing that it did not work out fine. Because of the pain. At night, I had to sleep on my belly. That doesn't sound so terrible until you consider that I'd been a back sleeper all my life. I'd lie there all fidgety and tight, and then after a while, I'd feel a swell of anger coming on. So again, this emotion that comes from the physical. I'd squirm around, cussing half nuts with the pain, and pretty soon I'd start remembering how Bobby Jorgensen had almost killed me. So now, notice the shift in language. It wasn't before it was like he made a mistake and he didn't do X and Y, but now it's active, that he had almost killed me. Not let me die, but almost killed me. Shock, I think. How could he forget to treat for shock? I remember how long it took him to get to me and how his fingers were all jerky and nervous. The way he kept, his lips kept twitching under that ridiculous little mustache. The nights were miserable. Sometimes I'd roam around the base. I'd head down to the wire and stare out at the darkness, where the war was, and think up ways to make Bobby Jorgensen feel exactly what I felt. I wanted to hurt him. So you'll notice that often these ideas come at the end of paragraphs. This idea of blaming Bobby Jorgensen and kind of the experience, and then, Bobby Jorgensen, I want to get back at him. In March, Alpha Company came in for stand down. So this is his company, remember that. I was there at the helipad to meet the choppers. Mitchell Sanders and Azar and Henry Dobbins and Dave Jensen and Norman Bowker slapped hands with me, and we piled their gear in my Jeep and drove down to the Alpha Hooches. And so here we've got the list of people who were part of that tribe, that close friends, those blood brothers. We partied until chow time. Afterward, we kept on partying. It was one of the rituals. Even if you weren't in the mood, you did it on principle. The idea maybe even that when you can't do something, when you can do it, you kind of go back at it even when you're not up for it. Like you might go out with friends or go out to a restaurant after quarantine is over that you might not have been all that excited to do otherwise. By midnight, it was story time, so back to stories. Morty Phillips used up his luck, Bowker said. I smiled and waited. There was a tempo to how stories got told, so here again, how do you tell the story? Bowker peeled open a finger blister and sucked on it. Go on, Azar said, tell him everything. Well, that's about it. Poor Marty wasted his luck, pissed it away. On nothing, Azar said. The dummy pisses it away on nothing. Norman Bowker nodded, started to speak, but then stopped and got up and moved to the cooler and shoved his hands deep into the ice. He was naked except for his shorts and dog tags. In a way, I envied him, all of them. Their deep bush tans, the sores and blisters, the stories, the in-it-togetherness. And so here we get the idea of him being an outsider, that everybody else, that it's not necessarily the blisters and the sores that he misses, or even the tans, but it's the shared experience. I felt close to them, yes, but I also felt a new sense of separation. My fatigues were starched. I had a neat haircut and the clean, sterile smell of the rear. They were still my buddies, at least on one level, but once you leave the boonies, the whole comrade business gets turned around. You become a civilian. So here we've got that kind of in and out, and kind of the getting it and the not getting it might make you think of Norman Bowker and not being able to talk to the people who don't get it. You forfeit membership in the family, the blood fraternity, and no matter how hard you try, you can't pretend to be a part of it. That's how I felt, like a civilian, and it made me sad. These guys had been my brothers. We'd loved one another. Notice the past tense here, that the love kind of disappears or isn't at least the same. Norman Bowker bent forward and scooped up some ice against his chest, pressing it there for a moment. Then he fished out a beer and snapped it open. It was out by my K, he said quietly. One of those killer hot days, hot, and we were all popping salt tabs just to stay conscious. Can't barely breathe. Everybody's lying around just grooving it, and after a while somebody says, "Hey, where's Morty?" So the lieutenant does a head count, and guess what? No Morty. Gone, Azar said. Poof. No fucking Morty. Norman Bowker nodded. Anyhow, we send out 2 search patrols. No dice, not a trace. And so here, this might be something about how to tell a story, right? Is it kind of that building of suspense and kind of creating tension in your listener. Pausing a second, Bowker poured a trickle of beer onto his blister and licked at it. By then it's almost dark. Lieutenant Cross, he's ready to have a fit. You know how he gets, right? And then guess what? Take a guess. Morty shows, I said. You got it, man. Morty shows. We almost chalk him up as MIA. Then bingo, he shows. Soaking wet, said Azar. Hey, listen. Okay, but tell it. So again, the idea of telling it right. Tell a story the right way. Norman Bowker frowned. Soaking wet, he said. Turns out the moron went for a swim. You believe that? All alone, he just takes off, hikes a couple of clicks, finds himself a river, strips down and hops in and starts doing the goddamn breaststroke or some such fine shit. No security, no nothing. I mean, the dude goes skinny dipping. Azar giggled. A hot day. Not that hot, said Dave Jensen. Hot, though. Get the picture, Bowker said. This is Mike A we're talking about. Dinks everywhere. And the guy goes for a swim. Crazy, I said. I looked across the hooch. 20 or 30 guys were there, some drinking, some passed out, but I couldn't find Morty Phillips among them. And so we've got kind of a looking forward in the story, kind of seeing and so noting that Morty Phillips isn't there and wondering, okay, so he went swimming. Now is he here? Did he make it back to here? Bowker smiled. He reached out and put his hand on my knee and squeezed. That's the kicker, man. No more Morty. No? Morty's luck gets all used up, Bowker said. His hand still rested on my knee, but lightly, very lightly. A few days later, maybe a week, he feels real dizzy, pukes a lot, temperature zooms way up. I mean, the guy's sick. Jorgensen said he must have swallowed bad water on that swim, swallowed a VC virus or something. Bobby Jorgensen, I said, where is he? Be cool. Where's my good buddy Bobby? See, they know that he's not a big fan either. Norman Bowker made a short clicking sound with his tongue. You want to hear this? Yes or no? Sure, I do. So listen up then. Morty gets sick, like you never seen nobody so bad off. This real kick-ass disease. He can't walk or talk, can't fart. And so there's kind of a little bit of comic relief. That's a specific thing that can kind of relieve the tension, but also specific that it's that bad. Can't nothing, like he's paralyzed. Polio, maybe. Henry Dobbins shook his head. Not polio, you got it wrong. Maybe polio. No way, said Dobbins, not polio. Well, hey, Bowker said, I'm just saying what Jorgensen says. Maybe fucking polio, or some weird elephant disease. Elephanty asshole, or whatever. Yeah, but not polio. Across the hooch, sitting by himself, Azar grinned and snapped his fingers. Either way, he said, it goes to show you, don't throw away luck on the little stuff. Save it up. There it is, Mitchell Sanders said, because remember, he likes the morals. And so what do you get out of a story? And so this idea that each story has a moral, something to learn. Morty was overdue, Dave Jensen said. Overdue, Sanders said. Norman Bowker nodded solemnly. You don't mess around like that. You don't just fritter away all your luck. So we've got this idea, kind of like in Enemies, this idea that in war there's only so much. And maybe courage. We've talked about kind of courage as a limited commodity. And now we've also got luck as a limited commodity. Amen, said Sanders. Fucking polio, said Henry Dobbins. We sat quietly for a time. There was no need to talk because we were thinking the same things about Morty Phillips and the way luck worked and didn't work and how it was impossible to calculate the odds. There are a million ways to die. Getting shot was one way. Booby traps and landmines and gangrene and shock and polio from a VC virus. So here we've got, we have narrator is one, right? Not necessarily to die, but a way to get yourself out or a way to have an injury. And then we've got what hit Morty there. Where's Jorgensen? I said. So there, this is repetition. He's looking for him, and we've also had that repetition of revenge ideas. Another thing, 3 times a day, no matter what, I had to stop whatever I was doing. I had to go find a private place and drop my pants and smear on this antibacterial ointment. The stuff left stains on the seat of my trousers, big yellow splotches, and so naturally there were some jokes. There was one about rear guard duty. There was another one about hemorrhoids and how I had trouble putting the past behind me. The others weren't quite so funny. And so here again, we've got this kind of the embarrassment of the joking, that this is something that that isn't a it's not a badge of courage. I don't know if you know of Stephen Crane's Red Badge of Courage, that having a wound is a way to show that you have courage. And here it's instead a way of humiliating and making fun of things. And so whether or not you thought that these were funny, there are clearly some that were even less funny. During the first dull day of Alpha's stand down, I didn't run into Bobby Jorgensen once. Not at chow, not at the EM club, not even during our long booze sessions in the Alpha Company hooch. At one point, I almost went looking for him, but my friend Mitchell Sanders told me to forget it. So we're wondering maybe why haven't we seen Jorgensen yet? Let it ride, he said. The kid messed up bad, for sure. But you have to take into account that's how green he was. Brand new, remember? Thing is, he's a lot better now. I mean, listen, the guy knows his shit. Say whatever you want, but he kept Morty Phillips alive. So here we've got this idea of making mistakes that we're seeing from the other side now. We've seen people make mistakes and take and feel guilt for it. When Kiowa went down under the in the field, there are a lot of people who felt guilt about it and thought about, should they be blamed? Whose fault is it? And here we have somebody who did make a mistake, and then people have forgiven them for it. So we've got kind of the other side of the coin, this idea of forgiveness. Whoops. And that makes it okay? Sanders shrugged. People change. Situations change. I hate to say this, man, but you're out of touch. Jorgensen, he's with us now. So now we've had all of that language of separation between the narrator and the platoon, and now we've got connection with Jorgensen. And I'm not? Sanders looked at me for a moment. No, he said, I guess you're not. Oh, ouch, right? That he's in and the narrator's out, Tim's out. Stiffly, like a stranger, Sanders moved across the hooch and lay down with a magazine and pretended to read. I felt something shift inside me. It was anger, partly, but it was also a sense of pure and total loss. I didn't fit anymore. Nice, concrete, short sentence. That's the problem. They were soldiers. I wasn't. In a few days, they'd saddle up and head back into the bush, and I'd stand on the helipad and watch them march away, and after they were gone, I'd spend the day loading up resupply choppers until it was time to catch a movie or play cards or drink myself to sleep. A funny thing, but I felt betrayed. So again, this idea of he felt like somebody had killed him, now he felt betrayed. For a long while, I just stared at Mitchell Sanders. Loyalty, I said, such a pal. In the morning, I ran into Bobby Jorgensen. So here, after a couple days of not, now we finally get the clash. They're back together, and we can maybe sort this out. I was loading up Huey's up on the helipad, and when the last bird took off, I was putting on my shirt. I looked over and I saw him leaning against my Jeep, waiting for me. It was a surprise. He seemed smaller than I remembered, a little squirrel of a guy, short and stumpy looking. So this idea of smaller than I remembered, you might go over to your elementary school or lower school and feel like things look smaller than they were when they existed at the moment. Big in memory, small in real life. He nodded nervously. Well, he said, at first, I just looked down at his boots. Those boots, I remember them from when I got shot, out along the Song Tabong, a bullet inside me, all that pain, but for some reason, what stuck to my memory was the unblemished leather of his fine new boots, factory fresh, no scuffs or dust or red clay. So here, this is kind of symbolic, right, of how new Jorgensen is, just like his shiny new boots. They're not worn in. They haven't been kind of seasoned yet. The boots were one of those vivid details he can't forget, like a pebble or blade of grass. You just stare at it and think, dear Christ, there's the last thing on earth I'll ever see. Jorgensen blinked and tried to smile. Oddly, I almost felt sympathy for him. So here we've got something that's odd, and this is a serious contrast to how he has felt. Look, he said, can we talk? I didn't move. I didn't say a word. Jorgensen's tongue flicked out, moving along the edge of his mustache, then slipped away. Listen, man, I fucked up. What else can I say? I'm sorry. When you got hit, I kept telling myself to move, but I couldn't do it. It was like I was full of drugs or something. You ever feel like that? Like you can't even move? So here we've got this idea where we're going back to that, I'm just a kid. I was just a boy. These excuses, these reasons that things go wrong, right? That we've seen in other places. No, I said, I never did. And then we wonder if that's true. And we're not sure chronologically where this fits, but certainly throughout the book, we've experienced the understanding that yes, things don't always happen the way that one wants to happen. Even freezing, and figuring out whether to go or stay when you've been drafted. But can't you at least excuses? Jorgensen's lip twitched. No, I botched it, period. Got all frozen up, I guess. The noise and shooting and everything. My first firefight, I just couldn't handle it. When I heard about the shock, the gangrene, I felt miserable. Nightmares, too. I kept seeing you lying out there, heard you screaming, but it was like my legs were filled up with sand. They didn't work. I've been trying, but I couldn't make my goddamn legs work. So he hasn't forgiven himself and hasn't forgotten this either. He made a small sound in his throat, something low and feathery, and for a second I was afraid he might bawl. That would have ended it. And so we've got this idea that it would have ended it, but it didn't, right? I would have patted his shoulder and told him to forget it, but he kept control. He swallowed whatever the sound was and forced a smile and tried to shake my hand. It gave me an excuse to glare at him. So this is something that he was it seems like he's looking for an excuse to glare at him and to keep hating, right? And to hold on to that anger. It's not that easy, I said. Tim, I can't go back and do things over. My ass. Ha ha! That's a double entendre there, isn't that? Like my ass, like you can't do that, and that's also where he got shot. Jorgensen kept pushing out his hand at me. He looked so earnest, so sad and hurt that it almost made me feel guilty. But not quite, right? Not quite, though. After a second, I muttered something, got into my Jeep, and put it to the floor and left him standing there. I hated him for making me stop hating him. And so this is a really important idea, right? Why is it that he hates him for making me stop hating him? What does he get out of it? Just like the guilt and Norman Bowker not talking, even though somebody will talk to him. Why does he want to hang on to this anger? What happens if he lets it go? What happens if he forgives him? Does it make everything okay and make it like and kind of excuse all of the pain that he experienced? I don't know. Something had gone wrong. I'd come to this war a quiet, thoughtful sort of person, a college grad, Phi Beta Kappa, and summa cum laude, all the credentials. But after 7 months in the bush, I realized that those high civilized trappings had somehow been crushed under the weight of simple daily realities. So here we've got an identity change. And that's important, that his new identity isn't that same as that old identity. And maybe that has something to do with this not letting go. I'd turned mean inside, even a little cruel at times. For all my education, all my fine liberal values, I now felt a deep coldness inside me, something dark and beyond reason. It's a hard thing to admit, even to myself, but I was capable of evil. I wanted to hurt Bobby Jorgensen the way he'd hurt me. So we've got this idea repeated. And he says he does equate this with evil, right? Evil is revenge and wanting to hurt somebody like you've been hurt. For weeks, it had been a vow. I'll get him, I'll get him. It was down inside me like a rock. Granted, I didn't hate him anymore, and I'd lost some of the outrage and passion, but the need for revenge kept eating at me. And so this, we recognize, is a separate idea, this need for revenge versus the hatred and anger. It's more kind of retribution and kind of evening scales than it is kind of making those emotions better. At night, I sometimes drank too much. I'd remember getting shot and yelling out for a medic and then waiting and waiting and waiting, passing out once, then waking up and screaming some more, and how the screaming seemed to make new pain. The awful stink of myself, the sweat and fear, Bobby Jorgensen's clumsy fingers when he finally got around to working on me. So you'll notice this long sentence keeps us in that moment also from... To kind of experience the length of time that existed before he got help. And that's kind of what needs to, that's created this revenge need. I remembered the soft fluid heat of my own blood. Shock, I thought, and I tried to tell him that, but my tongue wouldn't make the connection. I wanted to yell, "You jerk, it's shock, I'm dying." But all I could do was whinny and squeal. I remembered that, and the hospital and the nurses. I even remembered the rage. So we've got this idea of memory again, right? But I couldn't feel it anymore. So this idea of emotions, only having that emotions have a lifespan, and that we can sometimes bring them back to life through memory, but often those emotions do go away, and then it's just the concreteness of the memory that's there, and the emotion kind of gets pushed away. And so when we talk about telling stories and getting the seemingness of it and understanding it, even in memory, sometimes that goes away, and so sometimes maybe the story can bring back the emotion also. In the end, all I felt was that coldness down inside my chest. Number one, the guy had almost killed me. Number two, there had to be consequences. So here, this is almost a mathematical equation, that these are the two things, a cause and effect. That afternoon, I asked Mitchell Sanders to give me a hand. No pain, I said. Basic psychology, that's all. Mess with his head a little. So now we're getting to an actual plan to get back at him, even though he's not angry anymore, doesn't hate him. Negative, Sanders said. Spook the fucker. Sanders shook his head. Man, you're sick. All I want is sick. Sanders looked at me for a second and then walked away. So we've got this idea of not understanding. We also have the idea of the people who are in and the people who are out, that Sanders now wants to maybe protect him and is not and won't be on his side. So there's kind of this idea of choosing sides, which obviously in war important. We talked about that in Enemies and Friends. I had to get Azar on it. And so here we know the character that he is, that he has been throughout the book, is that, yeah, he's blown up puppies, he's been insensitive, and so he is maybe a natural choice for revenge. He didn't have Mitchell Sanders' intelligence, but he had a keener sense of justice. And after I explained the plan, Azar gave me a long white smile. Tonight, he said. So there's kind of an excitement to this. Just don't get carried away. Me? Still smiling, Azar flicked an eyebrow and started snapping his fingers. It was a tick of his. Whenever things got tense, whenever there was a prospect for action, he'd do that snapping thing. Nobody cared for him, including myself. And so here, this idea that Azar is part of the in-group and kind of part of that family, but that even then he doesn't like him very much. So that's different. Understand, I said? Azar winked. Roger Dodger, only a game, right? We called the enemy ghosts. So the Viet Cong would be ghosts. And so this is a reminder of our title for this chapter, yes? Bad night, we'd say. The ghosts are out. To get spooked in the lingo meant not only to get scared, but to get killed. Don't get spooked, we'd say. Stay cool, stay alive. Or we'd say, careful, man, don't give up the ghost. In the countryside, the countryside itself seemed spooky. Shadows and tunnels and incense burning in the dark. The land was haunted. So notice how many words we're using here to reinforce this idea of ghostliness and fear and the connection between ghosts and the enemy. We were fighting forces that did not obey the laws of 20th century science. Late at night on guard, it seemed that all of Vietnam was alive and shimmering. So again, this seemingness of it. Odd shapes swaying in the paddies, boogeymen in sandals, spirits dancing in the old pagodas. Some more of the things. It was ghost country, and Charlie Kong was the main ghost. So Charlie and Kong, and so another name for the enemy there. The way he came out at night, you never really saw him, just thought you did. Almost magical, appearing, disappearing. He could blend with the land, changing form, becoming trees and grass. He could levitate. He could fly. He could pass through barbed wire and melt away like ice and creep up on you without a sound or footsteps. So we've also got this anaphora here of the things that he could do that are unnatural. And then kind of an extended building, somewhat extended to building for fear. In daylight, maybe, you didn't believe in this stuff. You laughed it off. You made jokes. But at night, you turned into a believer. No skeptics in foxholes. And this is kind of a key idea, kind of maybe coming from the idea that there are no atheists in foxholes. This idea of things that change, that you kind of believe in things that maybe you wouldn't outside war. Azar was wound up tight. All afternoon, while we made preparations, he kept chanting, Halloween, Halloween. And so here, that's connected with the ghosts and the idea of spooking and, and scaring. That, plus the finger snapping, almost made me cancel the whole operation. So he's actually getting kind of freaked out by Azar's behavior. I went hot and cold. Mitchell Sanders wouldn't speak to me, which tended to cool it off, but then I started remembering things. The result was kind of numbness. No ice, no heat. I just went through the motions, rigidly, by the numbers. So here it's become more of a logical thing that he must get back at him rather than an emotional need to get back at him. I rigged up my special effects, checked out the terrain, measured distances, collected the ordnance and equipment we'd need. I was professional enough about it. I didn't make mistakes, but somehow it felt as if I were gearing up to fight somebody else's war. So this idea of self versus old self, and kind of maybe separation. I didn't have that patriotic zeal. And so we've also talked about somebody else's war in other chapters where, this isn't the war that I wanted to fight. Maybe against the Nazis or whatever from On the Rainy River. We've had that same theme, that same idea. If there had been a dignified way out, I might have taken it. During evening chow, in fact, I kept staring across the mess hall at Bobby Jorgensen, and when he finally looked up at me, almost nodding, I came very close to calling it quits. Maybe I was fishing for something. One last apology, something public. So we're wondering, what would it take for him to give up this quest for revenge? But Jorgensen only gazed back at me. It was a strange gaze, too, straight on and unafraid, as if apologies were no longer required. He was sitting there with Dave Jensen and Mitchell Sanders and a few others, and he seemed to fit in very nicely, all chumminess and group rapport. That was probably what cinched it. So this idea, this inside-outside, right? I went back to my hooch, showered, shaved, threw my helmet against the wall, lay down for a while, got up, prowled around, talked to myself, applied some fresh ointment, then headed off to find Azar. So kind of quick choppiness, lots of things going on, sequence of events. Just before dusk, Alpha Company stood for roll call. Afterward, the men separated into two groups. Some went off to write letters or party or sleep. The others trooped down to the base perimeter where, for the next 11 hours, they would pull night guard duty. It was SOP, one night on, one night off. This was Jorgensen's night on. I knew that in advance, of course, and I knew his bunker assignment, Bunker 6, a pile of sandbags at the southwest corner of the perimeter. That morning I'd scouted out every inch of the position. I knew the blind spots and the little ripples of land and the places where he'd take cover in case of trouble. So here, this is a little bit, this planning is a little bit like reconnaissance. It's very military, knowing where the enemy is and kind of planning your route to them, etc. But still, just to guard against freak screw-ups, Azar and I tailed him down to the wire. We watched him lay out his poncho and connect his claymores to their firing devices. Softly, like a little boy, he was whistling to himself. So we've got before the things that made him young were green and other things that were derogatory. Whereas now, little boy just makes him seem innocent. Rather than the other words that were used before. He was softly, like a little boy, he was whistling to himself. He tested his radio, unwrapped a candy bar, and sat back with his rifle cradled to his chest like a teddy bear. So we've got all of these reinforcing images, the candy bar, the teddy bear, the cradle, all of those kind of making him seem softer and more innocent. A pigeon, Azar whispered. Roast pigeon on a spit. I smell it sizzling. Except this isn't for real. So this idea of reality and kind of making something happen versus an actual fight. Azar shrugged. After a second, he reached out and clapped me on the shoulder. Not roughly, but not gently either. What's real, he said. 8 months ago in Fantasyland, it tends to blur the line. And so that's the idea of him not understanding things. Honest to God, I sometimes can't remember what real is. Psychology. That was one thing I knew. You don't try to scare people in broad daylight. You wait, because the darkness squeezes you inside yourself. You get cut off from the outside world, and the imagination takes over. That's basic psychology. I'd pulled enough night guard duty to know how the fear factor gets multiplied as you sit there hour after hour. Nobody to talk to, nothing to do but to stare into the big black hole at the center of your own sorry soul. The hours go by and you lose your gyroscope. Your mind starts to roam. So we've got this shift from the person that you are in the daytime to no longer being able to find that person. You think about dark closets, madmen, murderers under the bed, all those childhood fears, gremlins and trolls and giants. So we're back to kind of words that are spooky and Halloweeny and ghost-like, in fantasy, right? Magical. You try to block it out, but you can't. You see ghosts. You'll notice also that we're using the word "you" a lot. So bringing this very, very personal to the reader as well, bringing the reader in and recognizing that it's a universal experience. You blink and shake your head. Bullshit, you tell yourself. But then you remember the guys who died, Kurt Lemon, Kiowa, Ted Lavender, a half a dozen others whose faces you can't bring into focus anymore. Then pretty soon you start to ponder the stories you've heard about Charlie's magic. That magic again. The time some guys cornered 2VC in the dead-end tunnel, no way out. But how, when the tunnel was fragged and searched, nothing was found except a pile of dead rats. 100 stories. Ghosts wiping out a whole squad of Marines in 20 seconds flat. Ghosts rising from the dead. Ghosts behind you and in front of you and inside you. So then we've got this reinforcing anaphora of ghosts. After a while, as the night deepens, you feel a funny buzzing in your ears. Tiny sounds get heightened and distorted. This might remind us a little bit of How to Tell a True War Story and that idea of the of the brass band and the and all of the music up on the mountain, that listening post when they had to just be quiet. The crickets talk in code. The night takes on an electric tingle. You hold your breath. You coil up and tighten your muscles and listen. Knuckles hard, the pulse ticking in your head. You hear spooks laughing. No shit, laughing. You jerk up, you freeze, you squint at the dark. Nothing, though. You put your weapon on full automatic. You crouch lower and you count your grenades and make sure the pins are bent for quick throwing. And take a deep breath and listen and try not to freak. Then later, after enough time passes, things start to get bad. Love that ending there. As like all of this felt pretty darn bad all the way through. And then we get this final idea of then things actually get bad. That what has happened was minimal. Now things are getting bad. We'll pick up with the rest of the chapter in the next video.